It might sound crazy, but Napoleon was less worried if his generals were skilled and more concerned if they were lucky. Why? Because in the heat of war, in the heat of change, when disruption is happening both outside and inside the organization, the unlikely is, is the likely outcome.
Our topic today would be about strategic luck. In this fun and compelling talk, we will unveil 3 competencies for strategic luck that can help you navigate the unpredictable waters that we face today. You'll learn how to be even more adaptable, strategic, collaborative, and these skills really are meant to help you turn uncertainty into a strategic advantage. So let us get ready. Let us level up the luck in our organizations, in our life. Let's discover how to strategically create our own luck and thrive in times of radical change. So for today, we are privileged to welcome Jonathan Brill, who is a speaker, an author, and an advisor. Jonathan is an expert in strategic foresight. He writes, speaks, advises on creating, managing, and turning radical change to your advantage. Harvard Business Review recently called him the world's leading transformation architect, and Inc. magazine referred to him as a Silicon Valley legend. So Jonathan is a senior fellow at Harvard Business China's New Growth Institute and board advisor at Frost and Sullivan. He co-authored the book Rogue Wave, Future-Proof Your Business to Survive and Profit from Radical Change. It was published with McGraw-Hill, and it stands at number 2. It was ranked number 2 selling economics book in China. Jonathan is actually a frequent contributor when it comes to HBR, TED, Peter Drucker Forum, Forbes, Bloomberg, and Fast Company, as well as PMI, Brightline, and Thinkers 50s, just to name a few. Last but not least, Jonathan is a research consultant to the MIT Media Lab, and he's in management training at the Stanford University of Graduate School of Business. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me today.
Excellent. Very, very, very pleased to have you with us.
The only reason we invest in change is to improve our outcomes in an increasingly unpredictable world. What we really want is more reliable luck. For lack of a better word, I help organizations do just that. Companies ranging from startups to the Fortune 50, even the Secret Service. So, what is luck, and how can you make yourself dramatically more lucky? In a casino, luck is that moment when the roll of the dice and the rules of the game, when they collide to create an exceptional outcome. If you want to change your luck, you can load the dice or you can change the rules. In the casino, this is colloquially known as cheating, because for the casino to win, you need to lose. But in business and in life, luck isn't an outcome of the game. Luck is the game. So change the rules, load your dice, win the game. If we want to do this in our transformation offices, we need to think differently about transformation. It might sound crazy, but Napoleon was less worried if his generals were skilled and more concerned if they were lucky. Why? Because in the heat of war, in the heat of change, when disruption is happening both outside and inside the organization, the unlikely is the likely outcome. But typically, that's not how we select PMO leaders. Most organizations, we seek leaders with the ability to remove chance from the process. Instead, of the ability to work with it. I started thinking about luck and how to overcome unsurmountable odds about 20 years ago. This is Hadron Beach in Thailand, and it happened right up there about 20 years ago by that boulder. I was hanging out in the waves with my friends. We were bobbing up and down, and I closed my eyes. I was relaxed. It was sunset. It was a perfect moment. And when I opened my eyes and I looked around, things were getting a little darker. No one was around. It turns out that those big waves, those wonderful, soft, rolling waves, they were there because the tide had just turned. And what my friends knew that I didn't know was that on that beach, when the tide turns, there's a massive riptide. And so in that moment, alone, I tried to swim toward the shore. And as I was doing that, somehow I was swimming backwards. Now in that moment is when 90% of beach deaths occur. Swimmers fight the tide, they get exhausted, and they drown. Now, that's where I was supposed to die, but something unexpected happened. Exhausted, I stopped and I took a breath. And I thought back to my second grade swim class, and I remembered that riptides, they're typically only 50, 70, 100 feet wide. So if you let yourself go back, you can just swim across the beach and then right back in. And so that's what I did. And instead of dying that day, I went to the igloo cooler, I got myself an ice cold beer, and I watched the sunset. So, what are the lessons here? They're similar to three themes that are showing up in our research on strategic luck. What I call its ABCs. A, awareness. People in organizations who are strategically lucky have a bigger picture, a systems model of their environment. They understand the rules that govern the game they're playing. And they've also developed B, behaviors. They have deep skills that they've developed in advance to understand when that game's changing, when there are new opportunities in play. And C, culture. They work in a culture just like the one that I grew up in, that's comfortable with uncertainty, that knows that sometimes you do need to ride those waves and work with the tide instead of against it. What we're discovering is that luck isn't chance. It's a choice. And no matter how successful you are, any person, any team, any company can get dramatically better and quickly. Luck, it isn't chance. It's a choice. So would you like a little more luck in your life? Let's first talk about awareness. A land war in Europe, a pandemic, threats in Taiwan. These are all unpredictable surprises, right? Actually, these shocks were far more calculable than you might expect. And more importantly, their impact on your business is far more knowable. That means you can get ahead of it. At HP, we pegged a pandemic as about a 1 in 12 chance, yet 8 of the 10 largest publicly traded companies in the United States failed to even identify pandemics as a risk. Unless we have a process to make sense of the future, we tend to underestimate the likelihood and the impact of disruptions that, well, maybe likely we haven't experienced yet. If anything, hopefully the pandemic taught us that we need to stop looking at disruptions independently and start looking at what happens when they collide. How do they impact our finances, our operations, our environment, and our strategy? And how can we start to tweak those things so that instead of becoming a threat or a heart attack, they become an opportunity? I call these moments rogue waves. After the massive waves that pop up out of nowhere in the deep ocean, 100-foot tall wave can come up in a second and sink even the largest ships. When individually manageable waves come together to become unmanageable, when individually manageable waves collide. I think we're moving into a world of rogue waves in business and in life, and that we need to transform ourselves and our businesses for a dramatically different future than the one that we know. To do that, we need a process to make sense of it. Because, man, the future is going to be weirder than we've experienced. It's going to be weirder than we can imagine. In my book, Rogue Waves, we identified 10 major disruptions that are likely to collide in just the next few years. It's based on a multi-year study we did on the major trends shaping this decade, and many of them, man, they're holding up. It's a great place. This is a great way to start thinking about the changing sea around us. What happens when we see shifts in emerging technology? What happens when that collides with something like changing demographics? How does that interact with the new globalization that we're starting to see? When we understand these deeper trends, how they interact, we understand the deeper rules of the game that we're playing. We understand how to start to transform, to survive, to thrive, to surf, to win in the sea change environment that we are experiencing today. Now let's talk about B, behavior. How do you develop the skills to take advantage of the future? What does it mean for the way we work, for our power skills? What type of business acumen do our people need to develop? We're making an assumption repeatedly these days as I hear people talking about transformations that we can start to increase performance by replacing human time with machine time. As we start to use AI to flatten our organizations, we need to stop thinking in terms of span of control and start thinking about the span of cognitive work that people are responsible for. Just because someone might be managing 1,000 bots instead of 1,000 people doesn't mean they don't need the executive judgment of a senior leader. Man, the governance is going to be just as complex. We need to consider whether we're pricing labor for time or labor for value. Here's an example in my life. I'm a skilled writer. I recently wrote an article for Forbes. Now, a year ago, this article would have taken me about 30 hours, but using generative AI, using ChatGPT, it took me 3. The fact is, it removed tremendous amounts of writing time and research time from the project. But that didn't mean that it removed the hard-earned critical thinking skills to question that writing and to question that research. In fact, because ChatGPT is designed to make eloquent arguments, my analysis skills were paramount. As we automate, we need to focus on the value created over the labor saved. Value in the future won't be about whether you can answer the question. It will be about whether you can ask the question in the right way to get the right answer. That's a senior level skill, and it won't be solved by silver bullet learning and development solutions. We're going to need to find new ways to do that, and that's going to be at the center of effective transformation. As we automate, we need to consider how we're going to more rapidly improve the critical thinking, the ecosystem awareness, the policy skills of our more junior folks. because while their span of control may not be increasing dramatically, their span of cognitive work is going to increase explosively. And that means that they need to have those more senior level skills to take advantage, to move faster, to figure out how they're going to bend the rules, shape the system, play the game. They need to learn how to take the time to step back, understand the game they're playing instead of running straight ahead to try and get to the finish line. Because while you might be the best person at the game, if you're going in thinking you're playing poker, you're going to rapidly discover that your poker face doesn't work very well at the roulette table. And this brings us to culture. How do we transform teams to face the future? How do we transform teams to efficiently question whether what they believe they know is still true? As we transform toward a world of continuous disruption, I think we're obsessing about the wrong thing. Disruption certainly brings failure, but it also brings opportunity for the prepared. As we transform toward a world of greater change, I think we're obsessed with the wrong things. Yes, disruption brings failure, but it also brings opportunity for the people, the organizations that are ready to take the day. Disruption brings stress in organizations. It brings bad behavior. And sure, we can break out the psychological safety police and we can stack rank managers by their growth mindset. But they're tactics that try to get at a deeper truth. They're important competencies to be sure, but they only poke at the greater challenge that we face just under the surface. We need to start building our cultures so that they become stronger when faced with disruption instead of fatigued by it. This comes from nurturing a culture of strategic luck, one that incentivizes leveraging help from others, working across silos. One that supports finding unexpected connections, looking outside of what you've done before to maybe find a better way, a better path. One that works to harness, to control disruption, to find the opportunities, to find the options in it, instead of avoiding it and trying to hide it under the rug. And one that rewards those who take the time to know what's missing instead of charging ahead to solve the symptoms of a deeper problem. Luck, it isn't chance. It's a choice. Luck is a skill, and it's one you can develop in your life and in your organization. I'd invite you to join us. We're testing some tools to help you increase these competencies in your organization. If you're interested, click the QR code and we'll be in contact with you.
Thank you so much for setting the stage for us. Really, really appreciate it. As we move on, just let us maybe have the audience react to what they heard here. So I'll ask my colleague to launch the very first poll here, where we're asking from the three skills that you mentioned, the awareness, as well as the behavior and culture in your organization, and this is a question for the audience here, which one is the greatest weakness in your organization? The answers are coming in. Thank you for engaging with us. And I just want to remind you as well that the Q&A is there, so you can at any time ask questions. We'll make sure that we answer them. We are getting into the interactive phase of the discussion here. So more and more people, yeah, I'm seeing in 94, so 55% of people responding here. Culture started with a head start, but it looks like it's going tie now, or almost tie with behavior. Let's see as more answers are kind of coming in. Awesome. So what we get here, and you can see the poll answer here. And of course, this is not a scientific poll, but it is just giving us the feel of what the audience is thinking here. It seems like awareness is not necessarily the greatest weakness here. The tools that are there is behavior and culture, 40% and 36%, and so. So maybe Jonathan, can you maybe react to these numbers here? And sometimes one may ask even, what difference are you making between behavior and culture, right? Some people may say there are maybe one or the same. So looking forward to hear from you on that one.
So as an advisor, I come in and I do a lot of innovation workshops or strategic planning workshops. And leaders are actually often pretty comfortable. They know what's going on around them. And then we discover that they actually don't, because we're in our circle, we're in our circle of reality, our bubble of reality. And that's fine when the entire world isn't changing it. But in a world, for American companies at least, where you've got, as many people in China as in India, and China's growing at 150%, 200% of the rate of the United States, the world can change really quickly, and you can be unaware of it because it's not in your market. And so, I think about pandemics, another thing that was a highly predictable event. And if you look at it, you could kind of know what the outcomes would be, and yet organizations weren't ready for it, right? Without government support. So the first thing I would say is, actually, my experience is that awareness is much lower than we think it is. We suffer from availability bias, that the information around us is so much more present than the information that's not around us, that we think we know what's going on. The second piece is around behavior and culture. So I think that as we automate our organizations, and as we deal with a much more agile future, we need to have a lot more of that executive judgment, critical thinking competency moving lower in our organizations, because people who used to just do the thing, check the box, do the work, all of a sudden they have governance responsibilities, they have policy responsibilities, right? And because things move so fast, they have to make decisions before information can actually get up the chain. So I think that's incredibly important. And that's what I mean by behavior. Conveniently, in a world of acronyms, right? ABCs is great. And there wasn't like skills was an S. So it became behavior. The last piece is about culture, right? It doesn't matter if you have a growth mindset, if you have a culture without psychological safety. Right? We need to balance these two things. And my belief is that this has to do with the underlying incentive structures of the organization, that you can't just go and train people to be design thinkers, to do psychological safety, to coach their people, and to go and explore, if you have a culture and an incentive structure, right, that make that dangerous. And so we've got to figure out, as we transform our organizations, how to balance these two realities, right? That we have an old guard, likely, who's making these decisions about the future of the company, who grew up in a world where planning was maybe more valued than agility, and the reality that we're transforming for a world where agility is increasingly important related to planning. So we've got to figure out how to balance these incentive structures to create the cultures that we want, and think through how we govern those cultures so that we encourage these ways of being moving forward.
Thank you, Jonathan, for this insightful answer. And to your point, where when you were mentioning agility and planning, I often like to say that the two shouldn't be opposed, right? Planning does not mean that you are not agile. It's just at the same time actually being willing to pivot or to shift as needed. So sometimes people tend to oppose the two, and they needn't be opposed. It is rigid, maybe planning, that sometimes could be the challenge. Let's go to the first question that we got from Aisha. And Aisha is basically commenting, but I want your reaction on her comment there. The value of risk assessment can be overstated. Any reaction to that?
That's a broad statement. You can assess risks and not increase your ability to action them. My questions, I think, are a little bit different related to that, which is, I come from an innovation background. I spent the better part of 20 years running product innovation, R&D consultancies. And when I went into HP, this massive, older, computer technology company, it was a very planning-centric organization. And what I discovered was that the risk people actually had some of the best tools for spotting where those innovation opportunities were. And I became a convert to this idea, like you were saying, Tyra, that tops down planning and bottoms up agility, aren't necessarily in conflict with each other. What we need to do is put in the governance and the incentive structures and the culture that make it possible for them to interact with each other in a meaningful way. When we think about risk, right, we need to think about the relationship between innovation, between risk taking and risk management. How do we better balance these things? And so if we're just going to put in, our red, yellow, green checkerboard of risk and ignore it, yeah, it's not super useful. But if we're going to use it to create foresight about where we can make small decisions that shift our probabilities when the world change, and help our customers take advantage of those disruptions, right? That's where the real opportunity is. Think about Zoom, right? We're doing this recording on Zoom. 3 years ago, it was, they were doing all right, but it was really clear that Microsoft Teams was going to win this battle. The reality when COVID hit was that Microsoft Teams, even though it had the data centers, it had the sales teams, it had the contracts in place, it wasn't able to scale to the needs of its customers quickly. And so Zoom won because it was ready for that type of hyperscaling. When we think about risk, we need to think about, okay, well, if something happens, not just how do we avoid it, how do we take advantage of it?
No, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Great question back. Let's move on, and we have Sunil. Welcome, Sunil, for this presentation talk here. We are happy to have you with us. The question that Sunil has is, don't you think companies will redesign to remove functional silos that create bureaucracy? This will complement cultural change, and Sunil is asking if you agree. Do you agree?
I think it can. So there's a great book, if you're a super geek, called The Modern Firm by John Roberts, that talks about these types of things, the relationships between governance, innovation, and organizational structure. These things take time, first of all. Second, that you have a middle management layer often that wants the opposite of this, that benefits from the inefficiencies. And so the question becomes, how do you balance that? That the idea that we can have a more agile organization and at the same time have reliability in your workforce. The realities, I think, of purely stovepiped organizations versus matrixed organizations, are that matrix organizations are probably more innovative in certain ways. It's less efficient to get consistent things done in those types of organizations too. So we need to balance these realities. I don't have a clear 100% answer one way or the other on that, but I think the questions: what are the goals of your organization? Where are the strategic advantages, and how do you structure for that? Because I think that's what's going to shape your future.
Awesome. And I just need to share, because a few years back, we actually did a research with Harvard Business Review, and we look at the component of structures. And at the end, we all know people will say that culture eats strategy for breakfast, thinking about Peter Drucker. And what we saw out of that research as well, that culture beats structures, meaning that if you have a proper culture in your organization, actually people will move beyond the structure that you created. They'll move beyond the silos to have a collaboration that is needed to help you move forward. So very, very powerful finding there. Now let's move on. We have another question from Viswa. And Viswa is asking us, how can organizations improve their strategic behavior to avoid becoming a victim of bad management decisions and being unaware of market demand? So basically to overcome bad decision and not being unaware of market demand.
So that is the ultimate strategy meets the road question, ain't it? What I can tell you is what we did at HP, where I was the global futurist, and so I was responsible for a lot of the long-term intelligence capability in the company. When I came in, it was really a centralized thing. We were a small cluster of super bright people, and we were going to be the strategy people. We went into the C-suite. We said, this is, these are the big issues over the next 10 years. The first year, we got laughed at. The second year, what happened was we went to Indonesia, to junior managers. We went to France, to directors who had been in the company for decades. We found everybody who was interested in the long-term future of the organization, and we started connecting them and asking them what they were seeing, what they thought was important, where they were. And instead of being that centralized resource for strategy decision making, we became a telephone operator for the organization, for everybody who had a question, who had an idea, but it wasn't big enough. It was a regional idea or something. And we started connecting them together. And while we were doing that, we were building a report for the next year to the C-suite. And what happened the next year was, when we walked in, it wasn't like a couple of smart people. It was like 27,000 people in the company who we'd touched, a half of the company that we'd touched over the last year, and 100+ people who we'd had over 100 meetings with over the past year, who were all aligned on what that future was, and who were all being sensors into the organization, into the market. And so I think that what has to happen as a strategy function moving forward, particularly in these kind of global organizations, is that those people at the edge, they need to be brought into the conversation, and they need to be given tools to help expand the conversation. An example, there was a senior leader in our Europe, in our Africa group, who wanted to make low-cost computers, but there wasn't enough money in it, and there wasn't enough volume in it to do it. So we said, hey, you've got some really good data here. You've got some really good ideas. Why don't you go and talk to the chief of staff for India, who you don't know? Let me connect you, because they've got exactly the same problem. And we started bringing these people together, and all of a sudden we had enough critical mass globally to start making these devices. And so I think it's really critical, when we start thinking about strategy in this next generation of organizations, we need to learn how to listen at the bottom of the organization. We need to learn to listen at the periphery, and figure out how we're going to bring those small insights together into big global insights that are large enough to make decisions against at a centralized basis.
Thank you.
And so
Thank you.
That's the nature of the beast.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'll bring you close to something that is current now. I mean, generative AI and maybe the linkage to Locke. But before I let you answer that, let me set the stage. If we go back maybe 2006 or so, I think, right, or 2007, when the iPhone came out, and we all witnessed the reaction of BlackBerry, which has been a bit dismissive of the new phone that came out there. And today, when OpenAI released ChatGPT, on the other side, we had Google or Alphabet that has not been dismissive. They actually are responding, and they're responding with, birds that we all know. And in this situation, of course, there is one where there was dismissal of what the new thing was. There is one where there is acknowledgement, and there is maybe some reaction. How would that fare? And you can answer this question looking at the bigger picture about the implication of ChatGPT or generative AI.
So I'd like to just dive into that case example just a little bit more. So two things that people don't think about when they talk about BlackBerry versus Apple, and I think it's very important for what we're looking at today. One, Apple gained about a 2-year technology advantage on its touch screens, which were what made all these gestures that we use that really viable. BlackBerry didn't have access to that. And so when you don't have access, the response as the market leader, of course, is puffery. So that was part of what happened. The second thing that happened was that the iPhone wasn't hugely successful until the next generation 3.5G network technologies, wireless network technologies, came out, and it became possible to really push and pull data, and services like Uber became possible. My points here are two things. One, we need to look at, do we have the competency to compete on one side, right? That was BlackBerry's first problem. The second problem is, do we have the competency to compete when the world changes? And so what we need to look at when we think about ChatGPT or generative AI is that these are, infant technologies today, incredibly powerful. But what does the world look like in 3 years or 5 years? How does it change how we compete as these things mature? So I wrote, I wrote my book here. Here it is. Rogue Waves. It's a 300-page tome for people who are professionally interested in the future. It's the best book on that topic. But if you're not professionally interested in the future and you just want to answer a question, right? A book isn't the right medium, but maybe generative AI or a chatbot is. And so we're working right now on a tool to kind of automate what I know, so that we can start to have my virtual me, my AI, can start to have a conversation with you about your challenge, your problem, your interests, and pull out just the right little nuggets of insight in the way that's relevant to you. And so when I think about that moment, like you said, about, kind of Apple versus Google, I think about it in the context of my own life, right? What does it mean to be a thought leader? What does it mean to be an author in a world where what people really want is an answer to the question, not your book, right? And what we're moving into is a world where people want an answer to their questions, not your product.
Awesome.
What does that
Quite
look
deep
like?
here. That's very deep. And I like when you were saying, actually, it's about asking the right questions, because sometimes people feel like they need to know all the answers, but sometimes just acknowledging that you may not know, and knowing maybe what you don't know, and starting asking questions, and then being willing to listen and get the insight, and then being able to act on it. Because sometimes you may get the insight, but you may resist acting on it. Let's move on to another question, and this one is coming from Jan. And Jan is saying, how can hypocrisy and fear in large corporations be transformed into entrepreneurial culture you often find in family business? So here, this is the question about, of course, we all say you need to be teaming, you need to be kind of engaged together and so on.
Right.
But then there is that connotation of fear or hypocrisy, or what I would call lack of trust, or people saying A but doing B. How can you use that as a way to unleash the entrepreneurial culture that you often find in family business?
So one of the things that interests me about the difference between a mature family business and a large organization is the timelines on which you operate. So I have a friend who they have an asphalt business. They pour, they make roads in the Northeast, and they're investing on a generational basis, right? They're making a company for their kids. Whereas if you're in even the Amazon or Google, you're still responding to the quarterly whims of investors. And so what interests me in a family business is that you can actually shift the you have the fear of the quarter because you don't have as much capital, but you can shift the incentive and planning structures so you can compete in ways that those larger organizations can't. Where I think the opportunities are in family businesses, that there are a lot of small opportunities for cultural advantage and training advantage. So in a large organization, we bring everybody out to Tahoe, and we have the 3-day retreat where we do some training. In a small family business, you often never get that. And so people don't actually learn how to do things like give an effective order. And so you end up with massive amounts of churn and swirl in those organizations. But if you ask people, if when you're giving a direction to people, you do what they do in the special forces, what they call an op order, where you say, hey, here's the situation, here's what our goals are, here's what we think is likely to change, here's what I want you to achieve as opposed to what I want you to do, here's who you interact with if something goes weird or I don't come back. If you just give people those simple statements when you give a direction, all of a sudden you freed that person up to and what are the criteria for success? If you do those things, you suddenly freed that person up to be innovative without ever actually having told them what to do, right? How to do it. You've told them what the outcome is, what to do if there's a problem. You've given them the context, right? And you've freed them to innovate. These are things that these types of basic management skills are things that you can bring into your family business to make it more innovative and more reliable at the same time. So I guess when I think about the difference between a large organization and a small organization, those are really where I see the opportunities, right? Is taking some of those skills that you get in the largest organizations and translating them into your operations. And a lot of them, big things, multi-billion-dollar capital investments and stuff like that type of planning is not relevant possibly, but these tactical things are.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I often say, as a leader, when you put the light of a signal, you put it right, and you get to the intersection and you turn left. Really, it is important to watch out, because next time when you get to the next intersection and you put the light right again, people don't know where to look for, and people may be reluctant to trust what is happening. So it doesn't mean that you put the signal right, and it doesn't mean that you cannot turn left. But actually, if you did turn left, you need to explain why you didn't really did what you say you will do, so that there is that transparency, and that you are able to maintain that trust. Maybe you didn't have time. Maybe it was a last minute thing that happened there. So you let people in the know, as opposed to just moving as business as usual. Let's move to another question that we're getting from Vinit, and that is still on AI. But this one is interesting because I've been pondering on it. He's asking, or she's asking, what is your opinion about limiting AI currently and reevaluating how technology, AI, can be used in the future, as there is a threat of being used for bad reasons? So how do you manage this risk? basically they say goes, and let me give you the counter argument here. They say goes like, we don't know what the implication of AI will be. Let us hit a pause, let us evaluate, and then let us move on. And I recall, I think it was maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, where I believe there were a series of CEO and series of leaders who kind of signed that request. I understand Elon Musk was one of them. So some people will say, what? You haven't invested. We've invested in all these things. We put all our R&D teams in action. So now you're seeing that we're having an advantage, and all of a sudden you want us to pause. So when we pause, you'll be catching up on us. So so we are able to leverage our luck, and you want us to pause. But at the same time, we don't know the implications. So again, I didn't know what the answer would be, but it is great that we're getting that question coming in the chat here. What do you think?
It's a great question. I think there's the reality of the situation, which is that if OpenAI pauses, the Chinese companies won't. So you end up in this situation where the reality is not everyone's going to pause. I think the second aspect of this is that the growth of large language models is going to be limited by access to semiconductors, right? We made plans a number of years ago to produce these types of devices, and that's going to drive the rate of innovation in terms of just sheer large language models. I think the more important question is, we know that there are unknowns, right? But we can actually look at that, and we can start to say, okay, well, we don't know what's in Pandora's box, but we can start to ask questions about, like, what would happen if a foundational assumption, like, for me, we were talking about me as a writer and thought leader, for me, that writing is a hard skill, right? That was a foundational assumption. What would happen if assumptions like that blew up? That writing is a hard skill and therefore it's a differentiator. You can start to actually ask, even though you don't know what AI is going to do, you can start to position yourself to take advantage of the disruptions, because this is going to be massive over the next 5 years as we start to understand the implications for cognitive work. More importantly, I think, as we start to understand the implications for 3D data sets. This is what we haven't seen yet, which is where we have all of these LiDAR sensors in cars, we're 3D scanning buildings. All of these things are very hard to put together right now. But these are exactly the types of things that the types of AI software technology that we've developed are going to be very good at. And so what happens when the cost of creating a virtual world drops 95% for things like construction, for things like architecture, for things like self-driving cars, robotics, all of these things that are too expensive to do effectively right now for small projects, then the world dramatically changes.
Thank you. I know there are more questions than we can fit in 1 hour.
Awesome.
It's been really engaging. Before we move maybe to closing remark, we want your help here for all attendees. We want to hear your feedback. So Jonathan, you have the floor, the final word here after the session. What do you want people to go away with?
So, the reality, and we didn't talk too much about this, but people came in, they were talking about probability, luck is probability, luck is fate. Luck is actually the moment when those two things collide, right? When the possible and the actual collide. And the question that you want to ask yourself is, how can I make small decisions over time that radically shift the probabilities in my favor? How can I change the rules? How can I load the dice to win the game? Luck isn't chance. It's a choice. It's your choice. Luck is a skill, so build it, develop it, choose it. If we can help, I'd love to chat. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I want to mention again that we'll be continuing with the transformation series here. So we'll have one scheduled in May and then another one coming in June. So we look forward to continue to welcome you in this session. Our goal really, I mean, through the Bright Line Initiative at PMI is really to help organizations be successful in their strategy implementation, be successful in their transformation undertaking, because the failure rate that we see is so high, 70% failure rate. And in this world where, I mean, every resources should be counting. So really, we are thanking you for your support. We are thanking you for engaging with us, and we look forward to have you for the upcoming sessions. Thank you and have a great one.